The concept was not to get signed, not to be big. I think I was only in one band that ever tried to do that. And it's much easier and more comfortable and less stressful if you just say, we're going to play to entertain ourselves and we're going to play what we want to play. And if you don't like it, that's fine. And if you do, that's even better. But if you don't like it, we're not trying to, well, actually, I shouldn't say we're not trying to force it on you. We do when we play live. But if you get pissed at us, which a lot of sound people did. So basically we dressed like old ladies. It was actually a brilliant concept because we were starting to get older. I started in my 30s and we played our last show a couple of months ago and I'm 66 now. So played for a while.
Welcome to The Creative Asylum, a weekly podcast that digs deep into the minds of visionary creators of all stripes. Musicians, actors, filmmakers, writers, artists, cartoonists, and cultural disruptors. Here, we'll discuss perspectives of living life on your own terms. Life lessons that keep us grounded, insane, and sometimes pull us back from the edge. So, take a deep breath, loosen your grip on the bland and the boring. This is your weekly prescription for authentic living, creative clarity, and hopefully, a little bit of cultural rebellion.
Side effects may include spontaneous joy, existential epiphanies, and an uncontrollable urge to do weird and beautiful things.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Creative Asylum. I'm your host, Daniel House, and today's conversation is with a very dear and very old friend of mine, Sluggo. We first met in the late 80s when he was in a band called Hullaballoo and I was in a band called Skinyard. Since then, he's been in a whole host of other bands, mostly on the West Coast. Hullaballoo is based out of Boston. A band called Aint, another band called Grannies, who were around for over 20 years. They were probably the only punk rock granny drag band ever in existence, and why would you ever have another one, right? Since then, he had another band called REQ'D, which is kind of more of a honky-tonk punk country kind of outfit. REQ'D was how that band was spelled. Sluggo, not too long ago, published his first book called Guitargonaut, which is just basically a bunch of stories about his life in rock and roll. He's a great storyteller. It's a really fun book. And as we get to in this conversation, he's now started work on his second book, which is currently untitled, but it's stories specifically about the band, the Grannies. This was a really fun conversation. I think you'll enjoy it. So I hope you stick around and I hope you make it all the way to the end. My dear old friend, Sluggo Cawley. Hello, Sluggo. How are you?
I'm good, Daniel. How are you doing?
Good. I'm doing all right. Nice to see you. And nice to see all the art in the background behind you. We kind of we're matching in that way. Anyway, how you doing today? How's Portland?
I'm doing well. It's raining, which is...
Oh, yeah? Does that keep the ice goons like at bay, or do they just have to go out there and get wet?
Hopefully they just have to go out there and get wet. I don't know.
Hopefully they're like the Wicked Witch and they just melt and just go down the drain.
Nice.
That would be nice.
Ridiculous. Yeah. It's kind of ridiculous anyway, the whole thing.
It's so ridiculous. I don't even know where to start. But let's not go there. Let's instead talk about, I guess it's been almost 40 years since you and I have known each other, and you've been playing music longer than that, which is in and of itself bananas in my mind, just because it's been so long since I've been actively playing music. But, that hasn't stopped me from being creative and certainly hasn't stopped you from being creative. So we've had this conversation before. I'm like, damn it, I started my book 8 years ago and you've already published yours. At which point you kind of point out the fact that actually I started this like a long time ago, but you did.
15 years ago, yeah.
15 years in.
Yeah.
So did you, when you started the project though, were you really thinking in terms of a book, or were you just kind of writing and recording all these experiences and memories that you had?
I think I was just writing. And it was just kind of a biography or an autobiography. And at a certain point I felt, well, this is kind of silly. It's just, white guy, middle class, plays in a band. I'm like, wow, fascinating. So I would write for a while and I'd be like, well, this will be cool for my kids. We have
okay.
And I'll be like, maybe someday they'll get something out of it and be able to, I don't know, at least know some things about me that I hadn't told them or something.
Right.
And then at a certain point I was like, people kept, I would post different stories of gigs, and people would, give me some accolades and say, you should write a book. And I was like, no, it's just a story. And eventually I had someone who was a friend of mine I've known for a long time who was he's published a book. He's a good friend, and he was like, if you want to do this, I'll edit it. And
Which is
he's the one who
great.
kind of pushed me. Yeah, Cooper Bombardier is his name. A longtime
Is that
friend.
that's his real name? Cooper Bombardier?
That's his real name. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And
That's great.
I know. No, he's awesome, and he published a great book. It's really good. So he convinced me to start, and he unfortunately had some life issues that came up after editing for a while, and he had to bow out, which I completely understood, and I just did the rest myself. And I decided to change it from the story of my life to just different gigs, because I've played, I don't know, 500 of them in my life. And
Probably more than that.
the best stories are the ones where things go wrong and
Right.
you suffer at the time, which I know you're familiar with.
Yes. Yes.
It's all part of it. It's all
The
part
comedy
of it.
of the comedy of errors.
Exactly. And, people love reading about others' miseries. I don't know. Maybe that's putting it too
Well,
depressingly.
I mean, I understand the thing like, oh, white guy plays in band, like who, why should I be writing this and why should anybody care? But it's, that's pretty reductive, right? I mean, like for starters, you have some pretty great stories and some pretty funny stories and just some pretty nutty stories. But I think more importantly, I think you're a really good storyteller, and I think you have good perspective in how you tell things. Like there's always that air of humor, looking back at all the chaos of it all. If it was like white guy played in 80s new wave cover band, maybe that would be another story.
It'd be more white.
But with Hullaballoo and Aint and the Grannies, which, I kind of want to talk about more because there's no band quite like the Grannies. These are not necessarily, normal or mainstream bands, so to speak. And they're all very, I guess you might say confrontational in their own ways.
Antagonistic.
Antagonistic might be even, that's maybe even a better word. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's worthy of a book, and I'm glad it exists.
Thanks.
And I thought it was really cool because you self-published initially, and then you got picked up to actually be properly published and distributed, which is
I did. I'm on Earth Island Books out of England, and the guy that runs that is really cool and just really easygoing, and it feels nice to get some recognition that way.
Yeah.
And I sold a fair amount of them, so that feels good too.
And is he gone so far as to actually like getting publicity and getting reviews and all that stuff?
Yeah, some. I'm waiting for some more, but
Sure.
no, he's got me a couple interviews and stuff, and just also sends, like when I did that book tour 2 months ago in Denver with Bill Sassenberger, who also has a book out on Earth Island. David Gamage is the owner of the publisher. He sent us a bunch of books, just sent us boxes of books and sent them to the various stores and record stores we were talking in. So yeah, there's some support, certainly.
Yeah. I mean, that's cool. And now you're working on a new book, correct?
Yeah, I started a book on the Grannies.
Specifically.
Yeah, specifically. I mean, I started making a list of the gigs because I hadn't, and it's up to about 300. I'm missing like probably 10 of them that I can't find the dates on.
That's pretty impressive that you are that complete or that close.
Yeah, and I never kept track of them. I mean, I did in Hullaballoo. I kept track of every show, which is on a typewritten page, and I have all that. So that's why I was able to base a lot of the Hullaballoo stories on that. But in the Grannies, I had lost interest in keeping that sort of detail. And now that I've started a book on it, I'm like, oh, now I want that detail.
How are you able to pull in the dates that you are keeping track of? Just through posters?
Various ways. I mean, I made a lot of the posters, and it's like you become a detective. I go back into my files, and unfortunately, a lot of posters, for a lot of people, they'll put the month and the day, but they don't put the year. Because you're doing the poster for a thing that's coming out in 2 weeks or in a
Next
month.
Week, right? Yeah.
Why put the year, right? I mean, at a certain point, I did start putting the year because of that. It would annoy me when I'm like, well, what year was that? There's digital tricks you can use now where I'll go back into my files, and the poster will say June
Saturday.
6th.
Right.
Yeah, or Saturday, June 6th. And I'll go back into my digital file. I'll find it in one of my hard drives, and on the name of the file will have the year. So then I'm able to piece things together. Bart Thurber, who's a person we recorded with a lot, and I recorded the first Grannies album with him, And I was like, do you have any records of that? I mean, we're talking about 1999. And he's like, I actually
Right.
do somewhere. And it took him
Really?
like a month because he was moving, and he got back to me and he gave me the dates. And so,
Wow. Let's talk about the Grannies because the Grannies were in existence much longer than most bands are. You
mhm.
put out more records than most bands do. And there are particular things about what the band is based on the name that make you very distinct. So let's just talk about that because I'm expecting probably a lot of people like never heard of them. It's like, okay, but you should know about them. So let's talk about the Grannies. There you go. For those of you who are listening to this podcast as opposed to watching on YouTube, Sluggo just held his knuckles up, across which are the letters Grannies, Grannies.
I do have a tattoo of my ankle for my wife. But anyway, um, so Dean Schieben of Dusseldorf, Germany, was the singer. And he and I, and you would also include Chris Sanborn, the drummer who had been the drummer in Aint, the band I had previous to the Grannies with my wife, Lori. And I'd known Chris since Boston when we'd each had a band. I was in Hullaballoo and he was in Heyday. So we've known each other and played together for a long time. Dean, myself, and Chris have played every show from 1999 until 2025. Chris actually couldn't play the last one. So yeah, a long time, and it's kind of a ridiculous concept, and I think that's part of what kept us going.
A quarter of a century.
Yep.
Let's talk about the concept because
Okay, well, first off, the concept was not to get signed, not to be big. I think I was only in one band that ever tried to do that, and it's much easier and more comfortable and less stressful if you just say, we're going to play to entertain ourselves, and we're going to play what we want to play. And if you don't like it, that's fine. And if you do, that's even better. But if you don't like it, we're not trying to, well, actually, I shouldn't say we're not trying to force it on you. We do when we play live. But if you get pissed at us, which a lot of sound people did. So basically we dressed like old ladies. It was actually a brilliant concept because we were starting to get older. I started in my 30s and we played our last show a couple of months ago, and I'm 66 now. So played for a while. I wore a rubber mask every show, and we all wore dresses and wigs. People wouldn't recognize us when we were out of our costumes, which could be a good thing. If you played a really shitty show, you could just walk around and no one would give you crap afterwards. But but the concept just endlessly amused us. We thought it was hilarious. And also we're drawing on things. We're drawing on, it's kind of anti-patriarchy. It's like, because if you've lived long enough, you understand that women are smarter. All right.
I would agree with that.
I was actually just watching your interview with Jack where he pointed out that women have better hearing. He equated to they don't lose their hair either. So he somehow connected those two things, which I found really interesting. So we dressed like old ladies. We played pretty loud, raucous punk rock, and we had a hell of a lot of fun. And it was interesting when we played in places like Boston or more provincial places. And I'm going to say sound men because sound women this didn't really pertain to. Sound men would get really annoyed at us, like pissed at us, almost like we were having too much fun and we weren't being serious enough. And the thing is, we wrote all our own songs and played, a couple cover songs here and there, but we wrote all our songs and we tried to make them good songs. Sometimes they had funny titles, like Don't Step on My Tits or something like that. But we tried to write good songs. I'm actually using the title of one of the songs for my book so far, and it's called God Bless a Man in a Dress. So I figure
perfect title.
That's what I figured. Perfect timing. We need more men in a dress. It's actually very freeing to play in a dress. You can move much easier.
I imagine.
You can hide your knee braces underneath there, which I did.
Now, is it fair to call them dresses, or were they more like house coats?
They were everything. I mean,
yeah, whatever.
I had a German police coat for a while that I bought in Berlin until, we would actually end up rotting them out because you're jumping around, you're sweating in these things. We went to a lot of thrift stores, although we found out very early on that there's not a lot of dresses for people that are as large as us. And you could do stuff like Dean would do stuff like just rip parts out of them so he could fit into them, which would make them skin tight on them and possibly scarier. We changed our outfits a lot and just, so some people would think we're like joke rock. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, but it's not really a joke. I mean, we're having fun, but
right.
I don't know.
It's irreverent rock, perhaps.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But musically, you're writing serious punk rock.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. And we've
maybe?
been, speaking of our mutual friend, Jack and Dino, I've been lucky and honored enough to have, well, I met him when I met you the same day,
Right. Uh-huh.
in May of 1988, when you guys had, the whole band Skinyard had been getting drunk over at a bar in the combat zone of Boston. And
We
you
never
had hooked
drank.
up
What are you
this,
talking about? Oh, just kidding.
and you had, I guess, talked with my girlfriend then, JJ, and you were going to come stay with us, but you got lost and we had to go drive and meet you, I think, somewhere near Harvard Square and bring you to the house. And
That sounds like a tour.
yeah, that was the first time I met you. And,
Right.
well, it took me probably 5 or 6 years after that before I could convince Jack to work with me recording. He didn't like Hullaballoo at all because
Right.
Hullaballoo was very hard on your ears. But eventually it was actually my wife Lorian's voice, who was a lot like Mia Zapata's voice, just very earthy and awesome, that Jack decided to start working with us because he's like, I love this woman's voice. So I have her to
That's
thank
cool.
for that. And then after that, I was like, got my foot in the fucking door, and I was like, I just stayed there. And he's recorded 14 albums.
14 albums total or 14 Grannies albums?
14 albums total. So he did 2 Aint albums. Then I hooked him into the Grannies. He did all the Grannies albums. And then he did 3 or 4 REQ'D albums, which was the last band I had after the Grannies.
So how many albums did the Grannies put out then?
Probably like 8 albums, something like that.
Uh-huh.
We put out a lot of albums, and we wrote a lot of songs and had a ton of fun and traveled all over the world. Our first son learned to walk on a Grannies tour in Rotterdam. He's 21 now, but
and he is named after some underground rock royalty himself.
he is. He met him. Our oldest son's name is Dragan, and I have a picture of him and Dragan that he's named after from the Helicopters and Backyard Babies.
And then, of course, your younger son is also named after underground rock royalty as well.
Yes, Blixa. It was funny. My mother, when she heard Dragan's name, obviously when Dragan was born, and then when our second son was born, she immediately knew she better look it up online and find out which guitarist or whatever it was named after. So she figured that out pretty fast. Even though she referred to our sons as Bill and David instead of Blixa and Dragan.
Did she really?
Yeah, to friends of hers, because she thought that was pretty embarrassing. Say that.
Why? Just because it's a different kind of name?
Provincial, New England, just.
Okay,
yeah.
well, okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird, but yeah, I guess I get it. I don't know.
It's a little weird. They were, my folks, I love my folks. They loved me. I was kind of the rebel, though. I was the only one who moved away and moved to the West Coast. And oddly, they never saw any of my live gigs, ever.
Ever. That's interesting. My parents, neither of my parents ever saw me play either. But I also didn't play for, decades. I played for about a decade.
Maybe they didn't miss anything for me. I don't know.
I don't know. Is that been kind of a point of sadness or disappointment in any way, or just
a little
like
bit?
whatever?
I mean, a lot of my other relatives have come to see shows, and I remember a bunch of my relatives came down from Vermont the first time the Grannies played in Boston because that was the closest place then, and they were a little dismayed at the swearing. They told me afterwards.
Oh yeah,
I was like, well, that's our reputation. We're kind of naughty and
right,
uncouth.
So the Grannies had like a crazy long run. And you have finally decided you kind of folded shop on the Grannies, but you continued with a new band, REQ'D, spelled REQ'D. But since then, you have decided that you're probably done as a live performer, correct?
I think I am.
Yeah.
And I know that I feel almost like I've let everyone down or something to a certain extent because people love people that just keep going. And I'm just like, I did it for 40 years and I was the guy I did the posters. I often booked a lot of the touring. I didn't book it all, but a lot of it I did. I was the kind of organizer guy. Which you told me that was similar to your duties in the band.
That was my role in Skinyard. And
it wears you out.
It does. It gets exhausting. It's exhausting, but also like people begin to expect these things from you. And then when you don't deliver, they get pissed off at you. Whatever, pick up a broom, help,
Right. So it's like I've always said, you have a good show and you've set it up and everyone's happy, You have a bad show and people didn't really dump on me if we had a bad show, but I did. I kind of was like, well, I kind of feel responsible. I knew I wasn't entirely responsible for it being a bad show, because any number of things can make a show go wrong. It could be raining out, Danzig could be playing down the street or, any number of things can happen. And I think I got worn out on that. I just got worn out on that.
And the physicality of it as well, right?
I was going to say, unfortunately, my body's a little worn out on it too. I have bad knees from jumping off stage and landing on my knees, which looks cool as hell and makes for good photos, but you don't walk so well later in life.
And broken bones.
Yeah. Exactly.
Good photos and broken bones. That could be your third book.
Well, and stitches. I mean, stitches in my elbow from jumping off stage at CBGB's, but that actually turned out really well. So in terms of that's when I broke the guitar that Kurt wanted a month later.
The guitar that you wish you had now.
I don't even care. Someone actually...
Didn't you say like it sold for some insane amount of money recently?
His did.
Yeah.
I traded him guitars. So.
Oh, okay.
Right. So he gave me his, and I sold it a long time ago, but it's recently resold for $460,000.
It's just insanity. That's like a nice house in the majority of America.
Right. It's more than the house that we just got here in Portland, Oregon. But it does have, it has Kurt's writing on the guitar and it has my name on it. So whoever has that guitar has to look at my name all the time, which is kind of funny. There's people on the internet who are just like obsessive about things. And anything, obviously, to do Nirvana, there's just obsessive.
Yeah.
Some guy did this interesting thing. He contacted me. He was very polite. And he does things on Nirvana guitars. He does these long, I don't know, almost like half-hour long exposés of the history of this guitar, blah, blah, blah. So he reached out and he wanted to do a story on not the guitar that Kurt gave me that ended up selling for tons of money, but the guitar I gave him because it was the only Gibson SG that Kurt ever played. And it actually appeared in a lot of Charles Peterson's photographs. It's actually on the cover. Kurt playing my guitar is on the cover of Charles Peterson's last photography book. And so this guy did this whole story of the guitar, which I've managed to figure out over the years. It's been kind of a thing that just keeps coming back to the point of where you see Kurt smashing that guitar I gave him in the movie Montage of Heck. Really good footage of that. And he smashed it in Tijuana. So it's this big long thing about this guitar, starting when I bought it used in Somerville, Mass in 88, I guess, or so.
It's an interesting concept for like the history of a guitar.
He even went out and bought an SG and painted it and reconfigured it all the same way. In other words, he recreated it.
As like the character in the video?
He recreated it the way Kurt had recreated my guitar. Because I paint all my guitars. I paint all my equipment. I paint my amps. I paint my guitar. I have an art degree. Anyway.
That's why you're on the Creative Asylum.
Thank you.
Because, you're a creative person.
I never had a guitar stolen. No one ever stole any of my equipment, I think, because it looks so crappy. But anyways, so the guitar I gave Kurt was all painted. It was orange. It had writings that I copied from Jenny Holzner, the artist, New York artist who works with just words. And then Kurt painted it blue. He changed the pickups. He did weird stuff to it. Like he took out a tone knob and made the input jack there. And, originally he'd taken my guitar because it was broken and he could fix it and smash it again. But before he smashed it, he played it a bunch of times and he did all these weird things to it. So anyway, this guy, I was going to call him a kid, but he's just younger than me, which a lot of people are.
Yeah.
He recreated the guitar. In other words, he changed the input to the tone knob, and I'm kind of impressed. The lengths people go to do this stuff.
I was always impressed with people that took that much time and energy customizing, their instrument.
Those type of people would look at me and like how I treated mine. It's like, you just slap that paint on there and then you rub it on the ceiling when you're playing and you do all the stuff to it. And they look at me in horror and I'm just like, it's a tool. It's a tool.
Right.
If it breaks, I'll get another one. And then they'll ask me all these technical questions like, what kind of pickups that? What? I'm like, I don't know. Usually it's what came on the guitar,
Right.
They look at me like I'm a Luddite or something. Maybe I am, but I'm just like,
well, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's just the spirit of like punk rock.
I sold one guitar in my life, which I regret. And the guy was upset with me because this guitar I hadn't painted. It was early in my career and it had like 2 specks of white spray paint that I was spraying something near it or something. And he was upset about that. It was a Gibson Paul, which I believe Jack has one too, the dark walnut.
Yep.
And it was a beautiful guitar. I had made even a black walnut piece for the back plate. Yeah, speaking of back plates, I was thinking I guess I started this with Aint, but I continued it in the Grannies. And I'd kind of gotten the idea from the Butthole Surfers on how Gibby used to light a lot of shit on fire. Like the first time I saw him at CBGB's, and he would just light the cymbals on fire and the flames would lift the roof. On my SGs, I started putting up metal plate on the back of them. And at
Okay.
the end of every set, I would squirt lighter fluid on it and light it on fire and hold it over my head. So it looked like I was burning my guitar.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and
Nice.
it burns off pretty quick. You have to
Yeah.
try not to let it spill onto you. But I had to stop that after the Great White Tragedy. People weren't into having fire on stage anymore, understandably.
Right. I remember seeing Butthole Surfers when they would do that with the cymbals. It was the most amazing effect.
I mean, when Gibby was doing this, the fire was going up 6-7 feet. It was licking the ceiling of CBGBs, which...
Yeah. There's that story from the very first episode of the Creative Asylum with Scott Crane, where he's talking about the Butthole Surfers show down in Tijuana, where the Federales... I don't know if it's a true story or not, but it's a great story.
I've heard a lot of stories about
no fire, and he did it anyway, and they broke his legs or something. But, somebody else said, dude, I was at that show. His legs are never broken, but I don't know.
I don't think they didn't get his legs broken, but they were beating up Gibby. And Paul zoomed in to it looked like it was going to help Gibby, but actually what he was doing was getting the wad of cash they'd just been paid out of Gibby's pockets.
Smart.
Before the police found it.
Very smart, especially when you're dealing with federales, right?
Right. So he figured, well, I'm not going to get in the federales way. I'll let my bandmate deal with this mess, but I'll make sure the money stays with the band.
Yeah, which is good because that's kind of all you have at the end of the night, right? It's kind of cool you're mentioning Butthole Surfers because I have an upcoming episode with Jeff Pincus.
Awesome.
I don't know if you've seen any of his more recent stuff. He's doing all the stuff with banjo and vocals, and it's like looped banjo, and it's very, very trippy, very cool stuff.
The Grannies played with Honky one time, and that was an impressive band. He's impressive. It was like one of those gigs for the Grannies that just goes completely south, and I felt bad. I was weird. I was hoping to maybe impress him. He's someone I look up to. He's a great musician. Sure. He's super creative and crazy pants too, which I always admire that.
Yes.
And it's just like everything went wrong. The equipment, it was in Long Beach at this, I don't know, kind of broham club, Al's Bar, which
Alex's.
Sorry, Al's Bar was cool.
Al's Bar was L.A. and it's still there. It's still there.
I know it's still there. It's got a big reputation, but I don't know. They hated us. And the equipment was breaking. I remember my one of my effects, the tuner, I think, crapped out, and I just took it and threw it in disgust, and I think it bounced on the concrete floor and hit some girl, which I felt bad about, right in front of Jeff Pincus, who was watching us. And then our amps were failing, and we've played like 4 songs. And the sound guy comes on, how sometimes sound people they'll talk over the whole system, which is, just embarrassing, right? In other words, not something that's coming directly to the band, but to everyone in the club. And the guy comes out, he's like, one more song. And we'd only played like 4 songs, right? I mean, we're having some technical difficulties. We only played 4 songs, but thankfully, Michael Scanlon, who was our bass player for a long time and is just an awesome friend and an awesome guy, he always seemed to know exactly the right thing to say. So the sound guy goes, one more song. And Michael walks up to the mic and he goes, one more song? Fuck you, we're done right now. And we walked off. And I was like, well, I don't think we really impressed Jeff too much.
No.
So say hello for me.
or the other option you could have done is done like, a 20-minute Hawkwind noise jam.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, here's one song.
Didn't think quick enough. Well, except for the whole thing with the amps not working.
Right. I like the response. If you're enjoying this conversation, please make sure you hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video, leave a comment, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. It's the quickest way to grow our channel, and it's absolutely free. You can also subscribe to our other channels on social media. Check out our Instagram at Creative Asylum CA, that's the letter CA, or on TikTok at The Creative Asylum, that's all one word. Our website is thecapod.com, and our Facebook profile is the same, facebook.com/thecapod. All right, back to the episode. Are there any granny stories of infamy that you've started writing about that are worth teasing on this particular conversation? Or
there's a lot of them in the first book, which I have to realize in Guitargonaut, which I have to go. Do I go just deeper dive, or do I just ignore those? I don't necessarily want to repeat a lot of them. Nat Friedberg of the band The Upper Crust out of Boston, he and I formed a a friendship, and I wrote about it because it took me harassing him for probably 4 years before he gave in, but of our bands playing together, because the Upper Crust, if you haven't heard about them, are from Boston. They're no longer together, but they were amazing musicians, an amazing shtick. They dressed like 18th century aristocratic fops, and they just it would take them an hour to get dressed. They had wigs, white face paint.
Right, they did the white powder, the whole thing, right?
They did the whole thing, yeah. The buckle shoes, the hose, the breeches, and they were just incredible musicians. I mean, all of them have been in other bands, but they're just incredible, and they're super nice guys. And we ended up, the Grannies and them ended up doing 4 different tours, Europe and the U.S. with them. So we became all really good friends, and it was kind of a fun friendship. And there's a lot of stories from that, just that I've been writing about. When I was in Boston in my band, he was in a band called the Titanics, and they were huge. I never even met him. He was like way above us. He was kind of like one of the top tier bands in town, and we never even got that close. We did play with the drummer in the Upper Crust is Jim Janota, who was for a long time known as the best drummer in Boston, because he is. And he had a band called the Bags back then, and Hullaballoo did play with the Bags. So one of my ways into work with Nat was like, well, I'm a friend of Jim's, kind of, and But what was crazy, Daniel, is I realized that, like, oh yeah, I think I got a hold of him on Facebook because I didn't have any other way to get a hold of him, and I found those messages from 2010 in the message thing.
They're still there, right?
They're still there. So I just copied them verbatim, and it's me bugging him. The first time I bug him, he doesn't answer. I write him again about a week later, and he answers kind of, well, I'll check with the guys. And then it cuts to 3 years later, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to try one more time. And this time he's into it, because I rigged the whole deal. Like, look, we have Marshalls, you have Marshall amps over there. We could do, our bands would go great together. You come to the West Coast, you use all our equipment. We go to the East Coast, we use your equipment.
And I just love the whole idea of these two bands that have their respective outfits as part of their concept.
Yeah, and then Jeff Smith, who the singer of the Hickoids, Jeff came up with a name for these tours, Lords and Ladies. So
nice.
We were the Lords and Ladies tours. And we did a lot of adventures. For the first part of our career, I was still drinking. I stopped drinking in 2003, but in the beginning, we were all just notorious drunks, and so we had some kind of crazy shows just based on that.
Right, it's inescapable.
It is, and eventually I realized that if I wanted to stay married and then have some health in my later life, I needed to give up that.
Both really worthwhile reasons to not drink. I mean, next year for me will be 10 years of not drinking, and
that's awesome. That's awesome.
It's never really been a struggle, but it's always been something that I've remained incredibly grateful for, because, my basic thing is like, I'm a much better version of myself without alcohol, and I'm generally speaking more grounded and happier.
And you don't realize that at first. At first, you're like, well, this is just fucking boring, because your life is going way up and then way down, way up. And you're like, this is going like this. But it's funny that you talk about this, because we had some good friends in town for the last week, and they're on their way to Istanbul. I think they must have just arrived there today, and they're going to travel all across. It's a couple. So the woman, Leah, is Lorian's half-sister, and her boyfriend, Yutaka, who we've known them for the last 20 years. Awesome couple. Well, Yutaka he's about a year sober. And he and I were talking this weekend. At one point, we were off by ourselves, and he was saying how he kind of still misses it. And, he's like, I used to be the party guy, and now what am I? And I'm like, well, you could keep being the party guy, and then you'll be the dead guy, because we all have friends who didn't stop drinking, and that they dropped dead at 40 or they dropped dead at 50. And I just, we had this long talk, and I was just like, well, it's boring at first, but you'll start to realize that it gets better and better. And he and I were talking about how, like, when you stop drinking and you're still hanging around with your friends who drink, you're like, okay, yeah, I've just heard that story now 3 times in a row from you, from the same person. And then very soon you go, oh, that was me. That was me last year.
Right.
And you're like, God, I was annoying.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, great for people that can drink and it doesn't, ever sort of interfere with their lives.
Well, yeah, I get like annoyed at that. Like, my wife could have 2 drinks. She still drinks. She has 2 drinks and she's done. And I'm like, how can you do that?
I know.
Like, how can you not just, I'd have to keep going.
I sometimes could do that and sometimes couldn't. But, in my case, it was just like, I had a fairly severely alcoholic father, and I had a mother who shot heroin. And, I mean, I probably am genetically, not the best candidate to just drink indiscriminately. But the bottom line is for me, I kind of I stopped enjoying it. And yet I kept doing it. And at one point I'm like, why do I keep drinking when I'm not enjoying it? And I realized it had become a habit. And so, when I just decided I'm going to quit the day before this next birthday. And I just did. And it was pretty easy, Now I'm getting close to 10 years and I'm like, I'm not going to mess that up because now it's like a competition with myself, which is kind of goofy. But anyhow, and this is no judgment towards people that do still drink.
Certainly, and some people can handle it. And I mean, I was telling you talking when we were having this talk, and I said, on one of the Grannies tours, the band was already over in Europe, and I was flying to meet them. Lauren was pregnant with our second child, and so I needed to spend as little time on this tour as possible. So I left later in the band, joined them, and left earlier at the other end and flew back earlier. Right. Both ways, I had a beer, and I'd been sober 4 years, right? I had a beer, and it tasted like shit. I was just like, I don't even know why I used to like this. I mean, I was testing myself, and I guess I passed because I was like, I don't like this at all. Some people go, how can you're slipping then? I'm like, no, fuck you. I just had a beer. I mean, I never, AA never worked for me, and I'm very happy for the people it works for. And I did read the whole book.
Me too.
And I got stuff out of the book, definitely.
Sure. Yeah,
I'm like, but I don't, and I also was telling my friend that like, you may slip, and it's okay. You're human, you can always then start again, It's like one of the countries they're going to hit is Italy. And he's like, how can I not drink Italian wine if I'm there?
Yes.
He was wrestling with that, and I'm like, I get it.
I've thought about that. Like I've only been to Italy once, and that's when I was drinking, and that wine was so good. And the thing is, like, you drink that wine in quantity and didn't have a single hangover. Like it
makes the food taste better, and
all of it. But I'm thankful that I never did need to go through the whole 12-step program to stay alcohol free. That in of itself was not an issue for me. Whereas I've known so many people for whom it was necessity. But I've done a lot of the 12-step stuff around Al-Anon specifically with like my parents and all of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is becoming a different conversation than I guess that's kind of the cool thing about this format of having unscripted just conversations is because you never know where they're going to go.
And it's also the cool thing about still being alive.
Yeah. Speaking of still being alive and being alcohol free and being innately creative, you're not playing music anymore, but you're still doing creative things. I mean, you're writing your book, and I assume you're still designing stuff. Well, actually, I'm wearing a T-shirt that you designed. I guess my question to you is, what is it about who you are, how you identify with yourself, and the forces in your life that has always kind of pushed you along various creative paths?
I guess because I grew up in just such a straight white middle class, boring, you could say. I grew up in a tiny town. At a certain point, I wanted to rebel against that. I mean, my parents had told me that cities were horrible places. Then I'm like, well, then I need to get to a city because that sounds exciting. And 3 times in my life, I've moved to a city. The first 2 times, I moved to a city without knowing a single person other than my current girlfriend at the time. So I moved to Boston, not knowing anyone. 10 years later, I moved to San Francisco, not knowing anyone. And that's where I met my wife. But she is from Portland, and she was born and grew up here. So we have relatives here, and we've been obviously coming here over the years to see her mom. Her mom passed away 2 years ago. Before that, we were up here a couple times a year with our kids and stuff. So I know Portland pretty well, and there's lots of friends, and it's just every day I bump into someone I know. I mean, the other day I was out painting a little bit on that front of the house. It's early in the morning, and I could see a rocker dude walking his dog, walking by, and I hear him stop, and he goes, "Sluggo?" And it's my friend Brian, who was in the Hell Cows and has a bunch of other bands now. And he's like, "Yeah, I was walking by and I saw a Grannies sticker on a car." And he's like, "Who the fuck has a Grannies sticker on their car around here?" So, he was just walking by, and he actually lives a block away. And
that's cool.
It is.
That's great.
I don't feel as driven to do tons of creative stuff. I do get contacted, like I'm working on a 3-volume set for the Boston ska band Bim Scala Bim. They're doing 3 LP set. There's already the first one already came out. I'm in the process of working on the second one. They've been around for so long. I mean, Hullaballoo used to share a practice space with them in the mid 80s. So we've been friends since then. And so I do projects like that. I do art projects for people.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it keeps me busy. I don't know. I guess I'm slowing down. I feel good about it.
Yeah.
I was a picture framer for a long time. I met a guy who has 2 shops here, and I'm going to be his go-to guy. Like the picture frame business goes up and down in terms of when you're busy, but when you're busy, you're slammed. And so he's
Right.
going to like call me whenever he needs me, which is awesome because that's
That's
all I
cool.
need. I don't
Yeah.
miss framing every day for whatever. I used to work for like 12, 14-hour days, and my wife got me a banjo for my last birthday, so I'm going to try to learn that because later on in my life, I've really gotten into bluegrass and country. I think when we were growing up, we were like, that's not punk rock at all. But a lot of country is kind of punk rock if you get to that
The early stuff. Well, yeah,
early stuff.
there's an outlaw sort of attitude.
I've also been getting into jazz. I've been reading, I read a lot. So I've been reading a biography of Thelonious Monk, and I need to get a bunch more jazz stuff.
I've been into jazz since my whole life, really. My mom listened to a ton of jazz, and my dad too. But so I grew up as a little kid listening to Miles Davis and Horace Silver and McCoy Tyner and John Coltrane and Charles Mingus, and just like by the time I was 10, I had absorbed like massive amounts of all of that classic stuff from mostly the 60s, but also late 50s as well.
Yeah. And that makes sense too for me, and at least how I view it. You're kind of awesome bass lines you would write. Not that they're necessarily jazz bass lines, but that they're a little bit obtuse.
I've talked about this before, how I always want to be a guitar player. And I bought a guitar when I was, I think, 19. And then I got books and I practiced and I really worked hard. And I even at some point got lessons. And I always sucked. And I was so frustrated. And I moved to Seattle wanting to be a guitar player in a band, and I sucked. And then I had the opportunity to play bass, and I'm like, I'll get a bass. I just want to be in a band so bad. And suddenly it just clicked. I'm like, this is my instrument.
Yeah.
I still to this day, I'm happy to say I'm a good bass player, and I will still to this day say I absolutely suck as a guitar player. So my belief is that it's because I grew up listening to so much jazz and like soul and R&B from the 60s that it just kind of, and 70s, but like it all just kind of seeped into
you.
Yeah, it was all there, and I never even realized it. But that became the language that I understood musically.
That makes sense.
Sorry for the interruption, but we need to take a quick break for the sponsor of this episode.
This episode is brought to you by Bunny Smut. Are you sick of the Trump administration trying to gut our democracy and turn our country into a dictatorship? Are you disgusted with all the corruption, with the ICE raids against our citizens? Do you agree with the idea of no kings? If so, then Bunny Smut is what you're looking for. T-shirts that scream loudly no to MAGA and no to Trump. We're fighting against Trumpism and autocracy one t-shirt at a time. BunnySmut.com.
Something I've always loved is how you've created these show posters for your 2 sons for each of their birthdays. You have them framed up in their room, and I just think they're so cool. I'm really curious how you started doing those posters for each of your sons' birthdays, because they're graphically, they're so cool. And I just think I've always thought, what a cool way to honor your kids every year.
Yeah. So once again, like getting to work with Jack, the credit for that idea you're talking about goes to Lorian. I've been doing posters obviously for a long time. I did them, start doing from my ska band in early like 82 or 83. And I did them for all Hullaballoo. I did them for all the Grannies and Aint. I've done them for a lot of other bands too. I was hired for a short time doing posters in Boston for Joyce Linehan, who I think ran Sub Pop East for a little while. Anyway,
and she managed, I think, Six Finger Satellite and Green Magnet School, if I'm not mistaken.
That makes sense. East Coast Sub Pop bands. So my wife said, we should have a rock poster for the kids. And I was like, that's an awesome idea. So the first one was done by a good friend of mine, Greg Gordon. He makes his living doing posters. He's a very good, very well-known poster artist. He did the first 3 Ozfest posters, I think. And I'm going to not digress too much here, but one of the great things about the Grannies was we attracted both photographers and we attracted poster artists. I guess because we look like such a spectacle and we look different. And to this day, I have great friends made because they love taking pictures of us or they love making posters for us. So by this point, by the time we have Dragon, our first son is turning 1, I've already worked with this poster artist, Greg, a couple times, and we commissioned him to do a poster for Dragon's first birthday. So it's a fancy silkscreen poster. After that, I did all of them myself, but they were super fun to do. often I just used a photo of them during that year. And then my wife and I owned a picture frame shop, so it was relatively easy to frame each one. And they actually, I thought at a certain point they'd get sick of it, and they didn't really get sick of them until they were 18 or so. They kind of liked them.
I can't imagine being sick of them at all, but
it was very fun to do, just to make, it was another excuse to make a poster. And Photoshop is my favorite thing to do on the computer. So it was fun to do. But thank you. I appreciate that you appreciate them. And yeah,
I absolutely love them. So let me ask you one last question, Sluggo. As you look back at your life for all these decades and all this creative output, musically, graphically, the written word, and you look forward in this new city, maybe your final city, I don't know. And you just think about, what you want to do in terms of your creativity and how to be true to who you are as a person.
One of the things I've become much more aware of as I've gotten older, I got it from when I wrote all these stories for my book. I realized in the end, they were kind of about community, because in addition to obviously writing about gig stories and that, I wrote about issues we had to deal with. One of our sons got very sick and we had to deal with that. And just the community around that, and the community around artistic endeavors. Like I was telling you earlier about working with Bim Scullabim on the artwork for their album, and those have been friends of mine now for 35 years. It's become very apparent to me that it's community is kind of what it's all about. And I'm just reconnecting with people up here. I think especially in the time we're in right now, where everything seems to be aimed at dividing you and making you separate, and a lot of hate. And for me, I'm kind of the opposite. I'm like, it should be more about community and helping each other out. But I really get very appreciative of the people that I know, and meeting new people too. I've met a bunch of new people, like the neighbors on my street here. Just, I kind of look at a thing of like, you want to keep hope in there. You want to keep community and when I say community, I don't just mean just the people I've met through creative stuff, but just meeting strangers, meeting new people, listening to new music, reading new books.
Community can mean all kinds of things. And, I agree fully. I think that community or communities and people are ultimately the nourishment of life.
They are. I mean, our youngest son just headed off to college. He's been a little bit of a nerd. He's been kind of very into his video games and hanging out in his room. And it's really neat to see him start to blossom he's at a university, and he's already making friends and meeting new people and going to do new things. And his world is opening. And,
right.
We were lucky. We were able to take the kids to Europe a bunch of times, and they've gotten to see a fair amount of the world, and they love that. They love traveling. And I know we're entitled to be able to even afford to do that. Which I totally recognize. I wish more people were able to do that, because as I've traveled all over the world, people are almost always, they're super nice, and they surprise you, and there's not terrorists running around everywhere,
Right.
It's, again, it's community. And yeah, a lot of these communities, they go overseas, they go to other lands, they go to, I'm not just talking about my town or my country or they're just, that's that.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Creative Asylum. A quick favor before you go. If you liked this conversation, please be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes drop every Tuesday at 10. You can find us on Instagram and on YouTube at Creative Asylum CA. That's Creative Asylum and the letters CA. Our website is thecapod.com. And our Facebook is the same, facebook.com/thecapod. Until next week, when we'll have a new conversation with another creative disruptor, stay creative in life and at work.